at that party I was at, there had been a girl there pouring me drinks and just more and more and more, saying, "Come on, you're not drinking enough." And it was her. And so when it all goes back to it, it was her who caused this spiral of events. And looking back, it's just one of those jokes, that God will write into your story, because your story is part of God's story.
Treydon, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so we just had our first conversation a couple of weeks ago, which we titled Life in Transition from Zizek to Orthodoxy, where you detailed about how you really, through just some thinking, kind of had this realization like, wow, I really need to change the foundational approach of my life. And that's sent you off on an interesting journey, one which I'm also on as well. And it did really, really well on our YouTube channel. A lot of people have been listening to it. It's got many more views, lots of likes, also, but lots more dislikes actually than what I've done otherwise. I guess we have some Zizek fans out there who didn't appreciate that he wasn't the highest of the high of knowledge for you. Or something like that. But I thought we'd do a follow-up conversation and dive a little bit more into some of the things that we opened up there, and understand a little bit more how it is that this is impacting your life, how you're dealing with some of the challenges and whatever it is that's coming up as well, and get to know you a little bit more, because I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation as well. And I think for me, the starting point has been, so I'm also part of something called the St. Paisios Brotherhood, which is an organization over in the United States, but they have members from all across the world. It's just for Orthodox men. And it seems like there's this massive influx of young men, especially, coming into the Orthodox faith at the moment. Do you have an idea why that is? Do you have any thoughts or reflections on what it is that's causing that?
I would guess that it is a desire for some sort of tradition, for some sort of an order, and something that is it feels separate and sacred in comparison to the world today and our secular culture, where there is no more sacred anymore. I mean, you can find anything you want online. Nothing is rare. Nothing is inaccessible. Increasingly, there's far fewer taboos, or maybe they're shifting. The taboos are shifting, but stuff that we used to say, or that would be basically limited to the most intimate parts of your life, whether that be sexual or whatever else, these are all in the open now. But the reality is that this sort of liberation, quote unquote, that modern culture, secular culture, not only allows, but it forces it on people. It's like an imperative to enjoy, to be free.
Glorifies, right?
Glorifies. Yes, it encourages. But that doesn't, I think many young men are finding out that this doesn't create any lasting sense of meaning. You find meaning in order, in structure, in working towards something that feels eternal. And I think that's what you find in the Orthodox Church in particular. I know that every other Christian denomination, so Catholic and Protestant, in Canada at least, they all lost members in the last decade. The only denomination to gain members in Canada was the Orthodox Church. And I think it's because the Orthodox Church is pretty, generally speaking, pretty uncompromisingly faithful to the tradition in a way that the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church often isn't. So I think that the thing with Orthodoxy for young men is it provides a sense of tradition, of order, and I think perhaps most importantly is this idea of the sacred, of something eternal, of something beyond yourself to live for, beyond your base pleasures and desires, something eternal. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like the way you kind of brought those two seemingly opposite things together, actually. I was just talking yesterday to two Orthodox priests who spoke about, with regard to prayer, about how it has this ordering function of kind of arranging the world in a way that brings, things just kind of snap into place. And it does that at some way by revealing the unknowableness of reality and the mystery of it and the wonder of it as well, this attitude of wonder, and where the scientific worldview that has become the default mainstream culture approach to life, it's just like what are the facts? And it's like,
Yeah.
This approach that just breaks down as you kind of look closer and closer at the facts. They have this tendency to just disintegrate as well, right? So yeah, I mean, as you say, there's a lot of men who are doing this, and the Orthodox Church is growing. But I know where I live, there aren't that many Orthodox Christians around, and I'm guessing the same thing for you as well, living up there in Canada. So how has that been for you as a guy? Your family hasn't converted with you. I don't know if you have any close friends with you as well, but how has that been, being in a very secular culture and stepping into an ancient worldview and faith system that you're now participating in?
Well, it's been interesting for sure. I think one good thing is that my parish is overwhelmingly converts. And there's a lot of people near my age who are also interested in what I'm interested in, theology, philosophy, and just like, so I think I joined a good parish in that respect. Um, I I really I wasn't baptized until I was already basically graduated from high school. There was a few months left, and I wasn't even going to school. I was doing everything online. So my experience, I haven't had too much experience as a Christian who actually engaged in the world. That may be providential in a way, because I don't know how I would have faced up to the temptations, and with COVID. So I became a Christian during COVID. So there were really no parties to go to or anything like that. So so it was really that was really a time of introspection. For me, I was dealing with loneliness, uh and really I was just looking for something more than what I had, something something that I could dedicate my life to. And um, I really had no trouble um choosing orthodoxy over other forms of Christianity. Not that I don't see not that there's no value in other forms of Christianity, but there is something really specific about orthodoxy, which I mentioned, which is like the tradition and this emphasis on the prayer rule and living the Orthodox life. This is something which gave me something to strive towards. It also added some element of struggle to my life, and that almost adds like a feeling of, it almost makes your life a story, like a narrative in a way, where it's like you are climbing this ladder of divine ascent, as we call it in the tradition. And there is really something concrete and meaningful happening in every single moment of your life. And I think I've become more able to discern these moments where it's like, where you're being tested, or where you have to make a decision that will define who you are, at least for the time being. So I've really begun to notice stuff like that, and it's really, how do I say it? My life doesn't feel just basically mundane anymore, because now there's always that feeling that there is something bigger that I'm striving towards. Um, but I guess to answer your question, yeah, it wasn't too hard for me, just because I was basically already isolated from the world because of COVID when I converted, and then now I'm out of high school, so I'm basically just, on my own, doing my own thing now.
Yeah. There's several things that I thought I could pick up on from what you spoke about. One of the things, the first thing was this idea of evangelization in Orthodoxy, because one thing you don't see is Orthodox Christians kind of like going out and standing on street corners just after they're converted and being like, hey, can I tell you what Jesus can do for you, or something like that, right? So we don't have this kind of like aggressive going out there thing. It's really seen as as something, yeah, far more like a sacred mission given to the few than like, oh, every single man has to be out there all the time. And that's something that I think, I mean, Orthodox sometimes get criticized for that in some way as well. But what I've also seen is I grew up in a Christian family. I think this was part of the reason why I left Christianity for most of my adult life, was because I had this idea that it was my kind of my task and mission to go out there and tell everybody around me almost every single day about Jesus Christ, and that they need to repent from their sins and kind of, you know, John the Baptist kind of role, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I see now is, because that's still a part of me now since I came back to Christianity, then it's like, well, I have this beautiful and amazing truth that's changed my life, and so I want to share it with other people. And that's, for me, it can be an expression, or it feels like an expression of love. But more and more I'm realizing, well, you know, I'm just not very good at having that conversation, and I don't understand the depths of complexity of, you know, where people are at. And so what I think people need in their lives is often very far away from what they actually need. And normally what I'm doing is I'm just projecting all of my confusion and issues and whatever it is. And there's plenty of people out there who don't call themselves Christians, but are probably much better people than I am as well. So there's kind of like an arrogance of me coming there and telling them like, oh, this is how you should be living your life, and you need to do exactly like me, when actually I'm still busy tidying up my own stuff as well. And so I really like this quote from Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who says, find inner peace and 1,000 around about you will be saved. So that the approach is really to start with yourself, and to find repentance and healing, and then as you become the light, then that naturally attracts other people as well. So yeah, I don't know. Have you started? Have you? Do you have people? I mean, your family. Have they started noticing anything in you, or do they think like, what is this crazy new idea that Treydon's up to? What's been the way how's it been received by the people closest to you so far, Treydon?
Well, my family is they're fine with me being Orthodox. They really don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
And
Are they
my
do they have any Christian background as well? You grew up without any real.
I grew up secular basically. My dad was raised Catholic, but I think his whole side of the family is just basically no longer Catholic. It just sort of faded away.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like there's really not much there's really no very little Christian background in my family, so my conversion, especially how sudden it was, may have seemed, I think it was a little um not concerning, but there was like I do think my parents were sort of worried about whether, because at the time I was out of school, I wasn't really seeing anyone. It was just me and my online friends, and then suddenly I want to start going to church. So there was that element where it's like, why actually do you want? Are you actually serious about this? Is this actually? Are you doing this for the right reasons?
Yeah.
And I think in looking back, I don't think I never went to church just because I wanted a community or something. That's been something that came with it. I'm actually pretty I'm actually pretty bad at speaking to people or meeting new people and stuff. So that wasn't really something I was all that excited about. But
Mhm.
I have a great community at my parish. And yeah, so my family has basically taken it as well as I could ask them to. They haven't been they were, and they came for my baptism. So and my immediate family came, my aunt came, my grandma came,
Wow.
and my grandma my my grandma likes to listen to me talk about Christianity because I will just rant on and on, like sort of and today. And she grew up Christian, and she certainly believes, she's certainly not an atheist. She uh she talks about God, and she'll talk about angels too.
Mhm.
So she believes in heaven. So I think she's the type of person to not necessarily think too deeply about, like, she will believe in God and yet not require some sort of system to fit that belief within. But for me, I couldn't just believe in God. For me, it was either I'm accepting this whole system of atheism, naturalism, or I'm going full Christianity, and that's thank God what I did. And but yeah, but with her, she's very open to talk about Christianity. And I sent her something about a Chinese prophecy dated to the year of Jesus's crucifixion. And she was and it talks about how the sins of the whole world have been put on one man. This is what a Chinese wise man said. And I posted on Twitter actually, and I got a lot of retweets for that. And everyone was trying to fact check it, but no one could actually really, no one could explain why it was false. So, so she was pretty mind blown about that. But yeah, so my family's taking it well. My family is not necessarily that interested in Christianity, but for me, I I wouldn't try to push it on them because I just don't think that would work, as you say. Like, I think actually what Saint Seraphim says, one translation is find inner peace, another one is acquire the spirit, and you will convert thousands around you. And I think that's important because it's if you think you are going out converting people, that is pure pride because you do not convert anyone. That's something that I think Protestants do understand, where they talk about how it's the spirit who converts people. It is the spirit who converts people. And just because God wants everyone to come to him, it doesn't necessarily mean the spirit is actively working in everyone's heart at every single moment of their lives, so that they're able to actually believe in God. I think if you actually look into your own life and just read conversion stories and stuff, it seems like there are certain moments in people's lives when the spirit is truly working in them in a specific way, pressing the question, and then they can choose right or wrong. This is something C.S. Lewis talks about, I believe. So like, yeah, I think what's important is that you acquire the spirit.
Yeah.
You become a vessel for God's grace, and that will outflow towards others. And then it's through that, in that way, opportunities will arise to quote unquote evangelize. But yeah, you have to let that come naturally, I think.
Yeah, I think it's through your life producing the fruits of the spirit that people notice, right? And so it's really through your actions. And I think, you know, all Christians kind of get this as well. Like, at the end of the day, it's not through the strength of your arguments or the brilliance of your, you know, kind of deductive logic or something like that someone's going to be convinced. I don't believe that that's going to be pretty much all the stories you hear of people being converted is through just a personal meeting with another person who at a deep level, you know, is able to meet them and understand them, and to help them to understand their own lives in some ways as well. And one of the other things that you mentioned in the beginning that I thought I'd come back to as well is, you know, you mentioned that during COVID you were battling a bit with loneliness. And so one of the common objectives I hear from kind of atheist types, and certainly one that I had myself, was this perception that Christianity, it's for weak people who need some kind of false certainty and be able to get by in the world or something like that. And so they kind of grab onto something which is unbelievable, but they just force themselves to believe it in order, because they're so weak they wouldn't actually be able to stand firm in their own life without it or something like that. And I really get it why people have that perception, because at the end of the day, there's so many stories, for myself included, where I needed to get to a pretty low place in my life, and for things to be really falling apart, to be able to come to recognize the situation that I was in and my dependency on God. And I again, this is something I don't think can be convinced, but I think one of the things that can help, you know, to for people to understand this is just how, you know, human beings are inherently not just very weak, but we're on a one-way direction to our physical bodies dying. Like, we have the ability to create the illusion of strength for some time, but I'm 41 years old, and I was just out playing badminton for the first time in like 2 years yesterday. And oh my word, my body just can't do what it used to be able to do. It's amazing how it struggles, and how it's like developing, it's like things are just slowly breaking down in this physical plan. And so it's like when you start, and how, especially all through my teens and through my 20s and up into my 30s, I kind of lived as if I was immortal. I really, that was most of my decision making. There was no awareness of, or expression of awareness of death, of my own mortality, in the way that I was living my life. I was living as if I had all the time in the world just to continue having fun and doing whatever I felt like for the rest of my life. And so it was really with this realization that, like, no, this is coming to an end, and I am coming to an end. And so what am I going to, is there anything that I can lean on out there? And so then I got really serious about that search. It's like, is there something that's greater than me that I can trust, that I can put my faith in? And when I started looking, then it became so incredibly clear, oh, it's been there all the time. Just like the fish in water, saying like, well, what the hell's water? Like it's been there the whole time. I just hadn't been looking for it. I've been so focused on me and my own stuff, and whatever it is, right? So yeah.
There's definitely something about this, how God will work through your suffering. And when you feel like you're immortal, when you feel like nothing can touch you, how God will take everything from, not everything, but I mean, sometimes it's everything, but take something away from you in order for you to see your dependency on him. Because I mean, just recently, like with my YouTube channel, for example, I went through a period where I guess the algorithm was particularly favorable to me. So
God's so smiling on you.
Yes, yeah. And every single video, I would like I'd look, and there'd be like in an hour 500 views. I'm like, whoa, and it keeps going. And then some videos got 5,000 views, and then and then every 20 minutes I'm going on my phone checking the views and stuff.
Yeah.
And then just for about 2 months, it's been like not basically very few videos have gotten really caught into the algorithm. And that was disappointing at first, obviously. But now, though, I'm not obsessively looking at my phone. I'm not thinking I'm some sort of emperor with my 3,000 subscriber YouTube channel, because that's truly that feeling that I got. I'm not going to act like I truly feel as if it's a good thing that this happened, because in all honesty, I would prefer to keep getting views, but at the same time, I can look back and say, oh, okay, I see what the point of this was. I do believe that God works and everything happens for a reason. And from what I can tell, the reason for this is to sort of humble me, and to for me to realize that my highest good isn't YouTube. Because when I was checking my phone every 20 minutes to see the views, I can tell you that I was doing that more than I was praying. So what was my highest good in that situation? So yeah, there's like, that's why the Bible, like the Psalms, for example, there's so many Psalms about like Jesus on the cross quote, when he says, "Why, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" That's a quote from the psalmist. So there is room for despair and suffering, and even a sort of questioning of God. There is a way to do this, which is not sinful in any way. Like the psalmists, they weren't being sinful when they were expressing their feeling of despair. This is part of what it means to be a Christian. That's why it's there in the holy books. So yeah.
I really love it that you kind of have that awareness that, like, okay, I'm checking my YouTube statistics every 20 minutes. I'm certainly not praying every 20 minutes. And I think a lot of people say, well, that's, of course you're not praying. Like, that's crazy. Like, if you pray once a day, that's great, right? But there is this Bible verse that says pray unceasingly. And we have this whole long, 2,000-year-long tradition of people that have been taking this not just very, very seriously, but actually making it like the central focus of their entire life, to be in a constant state of prayer. And so it's like it's a highly challenging discipline that we've engaged in. And these observances are something that, you know, you can work on to start to master. And we have real masters to look up to as well. But it's very inspiring. And then you can get a taste of it, you know, in the very short term as well. So like, you know, it's not like the wins come straight away, but actually I'd say, you know, the very first time, my first prayer rule, it was a little double A4 page, you know, both sides of an A4 page. And I did that mornings, most days, evenings, some days, when I started off. Just something that someone had sent me as a PDF file. I printed it out and then I started doing it. And the impact of doing that prayer rule was very apparent very quickly. And it felt scary in many ways. It was like, well, what the hell is this doing to me? Can I trust this? Right? Because I don't know what this thing is and who is it? And is it really what they say it is and stuff like that? Right. So, but I could just feel the draw that was coming through it as well, that I was kind of being drawn in to something. So yeah, maybe it'll be good to hear a little bit more about how is this? Yeah, just any reflections on the prayer rule and engaging in that in your life. How's that going?
I mean, it's going fine. It was better 2 weeks ago, but yeah, one thing I've already said this before, but I think I'm becoming better at discerning when when I'm making the wrong decision, when I'm slipping up. So I had I had 1 week where I just felt like I was flying with the Holy Spirit, you know, like I felt like I was a holy man, whatever. So it was a good week. And then there was just little things I was doing that like with my family, not helping out with something. And it was, for some reason, during that week, it was more in my consciousness every single time I was being lazy or something like that. And just slowly and slowly, I just became more and more, became harder and harder to pray, harder and harder to sit down and read the Bible. And then it got to a point where I was just struggling to pray. And it's like, the difference between me a year ago and me now is that I knew this was happening. And in a way that makes you more culpable, you know, it makes you more at fault, right? Because Jesus says, if you were blind, he told the Pharisees, if you were blind, you would have no sin. Now you say, we see, so your sin remains. So the way I interpret this is that when you have knowledge of good and evil, when you commit that sin in full knowledge, you're more culpable for it. You are putting more of your whole personhood into that sin. You're choosing actively to do wrong. So even when it's relatively minor sins, you know, when you have that consciousness of it, when you know you're turning away from God, there are real and true damaging effects to that. But generally speaking, my prayer rule, I actually, I do the prayer rule of that Saint Seraphim of Sarov, he recommended people do. And he said, if you do this rule every day, once in the morning, once in the evening, the grace of God will not depart from you. 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys. That's it. And then I do additional stuff on top of that. So I pray for other people, and then I'll do every now and then I'll do an akathist. I have additional prayers that I read. I actually every evening I have a Orthodox evening prayer Discord server. So 5 or 6 of us will get together and do a prayer. It takes like 10-15 minutes. We're going through the whole book of Psalms right now, so 1 psalm a night. So that's basically what I do. The thing I tried to do the prayer, and I did for a long time. I did the prayer rule where the actual prayers that I do consistently every night were like 15-20 minutes long. And the problem was I was having trouble doing that every night. And when I felt like I couldn't sit down and just stand and do it for 15 minutes, I would just not do it at all. But with this evening prayer of Saint Seraphim, I can do it every single evening. And there's a sort of routine and a sort of consistency to it where it's like, even if I don't feel like praying, I can spend 2 minutes to do this prayer. And then if I feel like doing more, which occasionally often happens, I'll do more, right? So I think there's something to say about routine and consistency, because what God wants, well, I think last thing I'll say on this is, when people are new converts, they will, I experience this. You will experience the grace of God in a way you never have before, and you will want to pray, and you will be good at praying, and you'll do it for a long time even, and then that will slowly fade away. So the way I've been told that this works is that is God's grace working through you. But the goal of an Orthodox spirituality is the synergy of your will and God. It's not supposed to just be God working in you. It's supposed to be you working with God who is working in you. So the reason why routine is important is because when you pray, even when you don't want to, you are submitting your will to God. You are conquering your base passions, your desire to be lazy and just watch or play video games instead of do your prayer rule or stay up till 2 a.m. You are conquering those, and your will is becoming more and more involved. So I think the goal of the Christian life is to unite your will with God, and to have you be active in this relationship and not just God working in you.
Yeah. And especially it's the parts of your will that have actually been formed and shaped by that which is not God, right? And so when we've been participating in, destructive self-sabotaging behavior and doing all kinds of things that haven't been serving us. So, when you talk about that, I think that synergy image is such a great one, because it just shows that, what you are becomes far bigger and more unique when you're actually participating in God. So, I actually just had some long conversations with a guy who comes from a Hindu tradition, and for him, it's very much kind of like what you are is just this little drop of the ocean, and sometimes the little drops like jump up and think of themselves as separate, but what they actually want to do is just to go back down inside the ocean. And that's not at all the Christian view, even though we can understand that, and it reveals a part of the truth. And there's a beautiful truth in being a part of, this great ocean of being. And that is one way of looking at things. And the other way of looking at things, there's something incredibly, every single individual human being is created in the image of God, and is a perfect, unique representation of that in their own way, with all of their own talents. And so what you start seeing as you give up your own will to God, or what seems to be your own will, it's actually, you see, well, you've actually been participating in the will of demons, and those demonic influences are just boring, silly, stupid caricatures of ignorant, wasteful behavior, actually. And they all go down the exact same path. There's like, a couple of little different boxes that you could go into, but they're all very, very meaningless and very predictable. And when I meet someone who's full of the grace of God, then you don't know what that person's going to say next, right? They can be incredibly unpredictable and very surprising in some ways, because there's such a unique quality about them, in our experience. Okay, so one thing, Treydon, that I know takes up a lot of space for a lot of guys, and I'm a member of the St. Paisios Brotherhood, which is a brotherhood of Orthodox men, and they have a Telegram group where there's like almost 300 guys that are discussing all kinds of stuff. And the topic that comes up regularly is that we have seen a lot of young men coming into Orthodoxy recently, and in some places, at least in my here in Denmark where I'm living, then actually the churches are just packed with young women, and not nearly enough young men. But in a lot of churches and a lot of parishes, they've seen there's a lot of young guys. Maybe it's a part of like the whole Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot phenomenon, and not as many women that have been coming in there. And I can certainly say, when you were talking about, some of the struggles of following a prayer rule, I can say, when I converted, then having at that stage a girlfriend who also converted at the same time as me, and then at some point marrying her, that gave me a strength and a stability and a firmness and a clarity, and just a sense of a place of softness where I could regain myself, my soul in some ways with her, knowing that she was with me in that journey. That was incredibly helpful for me. And so I'm just curious, you as a young man, I know you have a girlfriend who is currently not converted, but is coming in along and attending liturgies with you. What are your thoughts about your relationship and how to handle, just as a young man with probably a strong libido as young men have, and you're needing to integrate this into a life as an Orthodox Christian?
I would say that you need really I needed I needed her to start coming to liturgy with me and to pray with me, because she'll pray with me even though she's quite open about how at the moment she does not believe in God. And I'm like, that's okay. I mean, just ask. That's why I told her. I just said, say, God, if you exist, reveal yourself to me. Say it every day if you want to. Say it every few days, but like, ask and you shall receive. And I think she's very smart, and she is naturally very conservative. It's odd because before she met me, she was sort of just involved in our normal culture, so she sort of just went along with the normal views of the day. But it took like it took me just to say what I believed explicitly, where she's like, oh, okay, this is what I believe too. So I think um naturally she has a disposition to where it's not too difficult for me to live a pious and chaste life with her. And also, she has a disposition to where I don't think it'll be very difficult for God to work in her. But yeah, what I said, it was important for her to start attending liturgy with me and to start praying with me and reading scripture with me, because you really can't serve two masters. And not that this is you serving another master, but like, if your girlfriend is just on a completely different wavelength, she's just doing something completely different, she's not even inquiring into the faith, you
Or
really
maybe
need to
she's
stop.
saying, I see, but she's not seeing, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what you said
right.
earlier. It's like,
Hmm.
I can see better than you can, but actually she can't
Exactly.
see. And that's when you know, yeah.
It's just difficult to live that way. And yeah, it's like, yeah, with her, I literally we just started attending, like we started dating in May. She started attending liturgy with me like a month and a half ago. So she's just starting. Um and she's actually reading, or not reading, but watching YouTube videos on Orthodoxy and Christianity, because she just didn't know the basics of Christianity. She didn't understand. She knew Jesus was crucified. I don't even know if she knew we believed he was God. So basically she just needs to get caught up on the facts, and also, just experiencing God in a way. And there's been moments where there's just been interesting coincidences that I've pointed out involving Christian stuff, where for example, she just started going to school and university, and it just turns out that all of her friends have ended up being Christian. And I'm like, well, that's sort of weird, because how did that all manage to happen in such a in a place where this university is not a Christian university? It just turned out that way. So yeah, and also I guess one thing with her is I, this actually goes back to what I was saying about when I was struggling with loneliness in COVID. I lost a lot of my friends at school in grade 10 going into grade 11. So this is right in 2020, beginning of 2020, end of 2019. And it was mostly because I I was at a party, and I was very drunk and made a fool of myself, basically. And this led to a spiral of events where basically I lost my closest friend, I lost that friend group and stuff. And I was thinking back on it, and the person who was, and basically this all, I needed to be separated from that friend group. These were not good influences on me. And basically it was through that I started talking more with my cousin, and we both converted to Orthodoxy together. So it was through that I found Christianity. And thinking back, I remember that I was at that party I was at, there had been a girl there pouring me drinks and just more and more and more, saying, "Come on, you're not drinking enough," and it was her. And so when it all goes back to it, it was her who caused this spiral of events. And looking back, it's just one of those jokes, that God will write into your story, because your story is part of God's story. And yeah, so I do think she is the right one. And I do I think she's been a good influence on me. And I'm hoping
When she's
that,
been pouring you drinks and telling you to have more, that
yes, yeah.
God was using her as
Yes. Yeah, and yeah. So but before we continue, I don't know if I'll have anything of value to say to other men who are struggling to find women, because she basically just dropped back into my life. I have no idea how to uh get women, or what to do when you're when there's not enough women at your parish, or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Well, I think that's a very good start. What you just said, actually, is that, if you put finding a woman in the center of your life, then often women are going to find you needy and
Yeah.
unattractive, actually, as well. So as a man, you need to be, first of all, at the deepest possible sense, if you're seeking God, that means that you are following where life is leading you in the way that can lead you to wisdom, insight, direction, purpose, clarity. And if you're doing that, women are naturally going to be attracted to you. And so what I really appreciate, and I'm convinced that that's why this woman has just dropped back into your life, as you say, is because she can see a man who's taking his own life seriously. And even when you're giving her specific instructions about things to do, which she could not possibly know are the right things to do given where she is at the moment, but you have a certainty in knowing that you can, with confidence, say to her, like, "Hey, do this thing, say to God, reveal yourself to me, and keep doing it." That takes confidence, and you're not doing that as a way of trying to manipulate her to get her to join in your belief system so that then you can, ensnare her in your kind of thing. But you're doing it as something that okay, well, if you see something in me, then this is where I have it from, and I want to share it with you. And if we're going to create a life together, then this is going to be the foundation of it. And it's a good foundation. It's a tried and tested and proven foundation as well, that's worked for centuries. And even scientifically, statistics will show, like, Orthodox marriages, they're strong marriages. Of course, they're not infallible, but they are strong marriages. And so that's a good foundation for a relationship with a woman, that I think is good. So yeah, I think that was very good advice, a good story for people to be inspired by as well. So good. Okay, Treydon, last topic I want to go into before we round up, is so these two Orthodox priests I was talking to yesterday, they said when they were busy studying, they're up in their 50s, 60s even, I think, and when they were studying in seminary, then they said, like, if a book came out in English within the world of Orthodoxy, some kind of new translation or new information about Orthodoxy, it's like, then they bought it straight away, because there was just so little. There was almost nothing available. And today we're in this situation where we're just awash with, certainly new books coming out all the time, but the online world is even more varied, and there's just so much out there about, like, okay, how do you get into Orthodoxy? Well, do you from Twitter and Instagram channels and YouTube channels and various websites and stuff like that, there's no end to all kinds of things. So what's been your experience in navigating the orthosphere online?
It has been, I would say, an overwhelmingly positive experience. But there are downsides to the fact, as you were saying, that now basically anything you want, you can find online. You can find obscure texts from the 1800s Russia, and you can find controversial texts as well. And that's one of the things that are dangerous. And I've caught myself in that too, as a catechumen. Even now, I mean, there are just controversial issues which 50 years ago, and all the years before then of church history, no layperson ever even had the ability to argue about this stuff because they didn't even have access to the relevant documents. And now we have lay people, catechumens, etc., arguing about matters of ecclesiology, church politics, controversial stuff that when it comes to um, just the way the church works, all this stuff. This is not stuff that we should be concerned with, because it's just that is not the hierarchy that Christ himself set up. The bishops are the head of they're in charge of the church. They are the successors to the apostles. If you don't like them, you still have to revere them. You still have to give them honor for their title, and you have to pray for them. And that's all to say that there is a danger to the orthosphere, because I think in many ways there are certain groups and certain people that encourage debating, that encourage talking about stuff that really you don't have any business to talk about. And I would suggest for people, as someone who made this mistake and still do sometimes, it's better just to step back, read about it. If you're interested, you can read about it, but just hold off on speaking on stuff that doesn't really concern you, and pray for other people and pray for yourself. Cultivate your spiritual life before you get into this more controversial stuff. But all that said, there's so much now. With all of that, I think that the way in which Orthodoxy is so accessible, there are overwhelmingly more positives to it. And there's so much you can learn. There's so much stuff that previous generations had no access to that you can read. There's so many brilliant people online that you can watch. And really, I would, one person I would suggest for people to watch is Seraphim Hamilton. I mentioned him in the last interview we did. He is, in my opinion, the greatest theologian on the internet right now. I think if he pursues theology in the way it seems like he's going to, he will be someone very significant in the history of the church. I truly believe that. But there's just so many people you can watch, and you can find your favorite person. And yeah, so I would say that it is very, very good that everything about Orthodoxy is accessible now. I think it's there are some negatives to it. There are some downsides, but I think the fact that Orthodoxy is so special and has an appeal to it, and when you actually learn about it, the more you learn about it, the more you realize the richness, the infinite depth it has. That I think the fact that there's so much out there to read, that is just making it easier for everyone of all walks of life to discover. So I think it's a very good thing. And I mean, I found Orthodoxy through the internet. So I owe people like Jonathan Peugeot, like Jay Dyer, like Seraphim, all these people, they were part of my journey to Orthodoxy, and I'm very grateful for them. And I know you're wanting to talk more about Orthodoxy on your channel. I'm wanting to do that as well. I actually have I have two priests at my parish. One is very, very well read on philosophy and theology, and he's helping me out with my scripts and stuff. So I'm going to be starting to make more theological videos. I'm thinking I'm going to focus on 20th century Orthodox theology, because there's very little videos on that. But yeah, there's high demand for stuff that I think if you feel like you have a calling to it, and you have some general guidance and a blessing of your priest, I think you should go for it. As long as you are not neglecting your spiritual life, you aren't causing controversy when it's completely unnecessary to. But yeah.
I just add to that, get the blessing of your priest as well. Ask him for a blessing.
Yeah.
I've started so many new things up in my work life and in my personal life without asking for my blessing of my priest. And then actually something happened. Part of this change was just about, what's it now, 4 months ago, is that my wife had a conversation with the priest, and then we'd been trying for over a year to have a second child. And then she, almost by coincidence, came to realize like, oh, I haven't asked the blessing of our priest. And so she said like, can I have your blessing? And so then he yes, of course. And he gave a blessing for her. And 2 days later she was pregnant.
Wow.
So that just was
Wow.
just like a reminder for me. It's like, when I set out to do things, there's just so many blind spots. And it's also the pattern of King David, right? Is that he, when he did something, that this was what you really just see again and again and again in his life, is that he first went to God before he engaged in, big, wars or conflicts or whatever it is, right? He got that blessing. So I think that's a very important aspect to do. It's like we're used to just this individualist thing. And as you said, like when you engage in the church, and there is church politics in Orthodoxy, Orthodox churches are certainly not perfect. There's all kinds of trouble and stuff in there. For me, one of the biggest blessings I've had in my Orthodox life is having a priest who I've severely disagreed with in very, very concrete terms, and decided, okay, well, I'm just going to submit to this. Even though I think it's destructive and stupid and irritating and wrong, I'm just going to say, well, that's not my decision to make, And so I'm going to express my disagreement to him, but I'm also going to just submit to him. And that was an incredibly valuable thing of giving up. And Saint Paisios, I've been reading his life as well, talks about how he was sometimes working under an elder monk who was, just completely unreasonable and absolutely unjust, and terrible leader, and how he just went as far as possible and even further many times in order to submit his will to this guy, and not to take responsibility onto himself, even for things that were very, very clearly the fault of his oversight or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's great. For myself, I found that I had this tendency of kind of diving into material that was way too advanced for me, and where I was at this moment. I read one of the early books, probably after being Orthodox for 2.5 years, I read John Climacus, The Ladder of Divine Ascent. And I've just realized like there's so much like incredibly deep, wonderful and mysterious ideas, and very, very extremely challenging ideas in there. And more and more I'm seeing the value in rather taking things at the right pace. So, what I've done now is I've actually just signed up for studying a certificate in theological studies with a seminary. It's a seminary over in Jordanville, Russian Orthodox Holy Trinity monastery and seminary together. And that's just fantastic. It gives me, it's bringing things into my life at the right tempo, with the right level of challenge and insight. I will say, when you said something like along the lines of like, well, all of Orthodox is available to us now, I've just started liturgics, and I promise you, liturgics is not very accessible still. That's a subject where I have a sense that there's some really, really deep patterns of existence that can be shown when you study liturgics. And I think Father Alexander Schmemann has some real insights that he gained through a very, very complex study of that field. But me going into liturgics 101, like the introductory course, my word, like it's just like way over my head, most of the stuff. It's really, really complicated. So I hope that I will be given some patience and wisdom and attention to be able to understand it better. But still, I think like in the English language, and just as far as like accessible text is concerned, there's a real lack of something still. And so, yeah, we have a lot to learn from as well. So good. Yeah. So Treydon, last time we spoke about, you had this project baptizing Orthodox, and baptizing philosophy.
Yeah.
So can you give us an update and maybe people didn't watch the first one. So what is it you're up to? What are your projects coming in for your online work these days?
The baptizing philosophy thing is basically a name that we've put on a few of us making videos, and there's an open invitation to anyone who is interested in doing the same thing, making the same type of videos, or writing, putting a name on what we've been doing, which is reading philosophy, specifically modern philosophy, from within an Orthodox paradigm, seeing where they fit and where they don't fit. And you can because the way orthodoxy works so coherently, you can usually explain why and where they go wrong. Like you can say, this is exactly the point where they deviate and it leads to all of these problems. And it's really cool to see. So yeah, it's just a few of us creating videos. I'm personally going to start a podcast called the Baptizing Philosophy Podcast. I have a few people lined up already to start. I want to have Jonathan Pajot on one time. I want to see if he would be interested in talking about Heidegger, because he talks so much about Heidegger, and I've been reading through Heidegger. So I'm going to try and get into contact with him somehow. But yeah, so there's the videos we're making all under the heading of Baptizing Philosophy. There is the podcast that I'm going to be starting. We're going to have the promotional video out for that soon. And basically all the discussion around that is centered in my Discord. So yeah, that's basically the gist of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Your
I'm
Discord, is
excited.
that something that's open to the public that people can join?
Oh yeah, yep. There's a link to that on my YouTube and all my videos and stuff. Yeah, open invite to anyone.
Okay, thanks. Then I'll just finish off with a little plug here, because I mentioned that I was recording a podcast yesterday with 2 Orthodox priests. And that's going to be a new podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. It's going to be called Iron Sharpens Iron. It's the first podcast, as far as we know, that's been specifically addressed only towards men. And so I'm doing that with Father Hans Jacobse, Father Michael Butler, and that's really exciting. And I thought this conversation was actually a beautiful taster for what we're hoping to get out there, Treydon. So really appreciate the opportunity of listening to a young man who, in many ways, I think is showing a path. And a part of forging that path for what it seems to be a large amount of men in this generation that are gaining a lot of value from diving into. So thanks a lot for that. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yeah, it was a great discussion.
Thanks, Treydon.